Welcome to English 4E. This is class 23. We are working on assignment 29 today, which has two parts. Part A is a character sketch, and part B is a summary of a media show. And it is Tuesday, March 25th. And I'm Jillian Percy. Here is our contact information. There we go. My Facebook and YouTube are the same, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. If you're looking for previous recordings, they will be on the YouTube. I have little playlists for each term. If you want to ask me a question about an assignment, you can reach me on Facebook or email me at jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You can also call into the studio if you have a question about an assignment we're talking about today, 1-800-465-7144. And if you need to reach me at the office, 1-800-667-3703. Always send your assignments with your name, the course number, assignment number, name, and if they have a rough and good copy, please label that as well. And they all go to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. They don't come to me directly, okay? Okay. Today's work. We are going to review the parts in a character sketch, the outward appearance, inner personality, significance and importance to show and plot. Discuss different genres and their criteria in TV and movie shows. Identify important elements to a media show summary. Explore ways to identify what you like about a show and how to write about it. Okay, so key question 29, part A, understanding a media work. The whole question is worth 20 marks and the character sketch is worth 10 marks. If you recall, a character sketch is a description of a character in terms of physical appearance, personality traits, and overall importance in a story. Choose a character from one of your favorite TV shows or movies. Your character sketch will be a paragraph consisting of at least 7 sentences. You need to submit only a final copy of your sketch for marking. Pretend that you are describing this character to someone who knows nothing about the show or the movie. What are the most important details they need to know about the character? Keep in mind, you're going to be using the same show and character for part A and for part B. So whatever show you choose the character from is also what you're going to be discussing in part B of the assignment. So be sure to choose a show and a character that you know a lot about and feel very comfortable discussing and writing about. Also keep in mind that I may not have seen this show or know the character. So you want to make sure you describe them well enough, both physically and personality-wise, that I can picture them and imagine what they're like, even if I haven't seen the TV show or movie. I really don't watch a lot of modern TV, so you'll need to be very specific. Okay. Remember that we start a character sketch with the outward appearance. Things can be mentioned in a very general or a very specific way. So hair color, length, style are often one of the first things mentioned. So for example, things like, she had short, spiky pink hair that was blonde at the roots. His long, dark dreadlocks went past his shoulders and framed his face. It's also going to include things like facial hair, like beards, mustaches, sideburns. The man had a long white beard like Santa Claus. A light brown goatee framed his chin and lips. It can include skin color or race or cultural heritage. Her skin was peach-colored and covered in freckles. It can include height and body shape or build. Sometimes height can be very specific, but in general, when I run into somebody, I don't necessarily immediately think what their exact measurements are. I just kind of notice whether they're tall or not tall, but it could be very specific, like he was 6'11" and had to duck down when he went through doorways. She was short, which often fooled people into thinking she was only a teenager. It can also include prominent tattoos or piercings. There was a snake tattoo winding up his neck. She had a double piercing above her eyebrow. So I want to point out that although I'm describing people, I am also trying to make the sentences interesting. You don't want them to just be a short thing of, he was tall, he was fat, he had brown hair. That gets really choppy to read. So you want to kind of think about how to make your sentences sound good as well as be describing. Comparisons like Santa Claus, um, had to duck down when they went through doorways, fooling people to thinking they were a teenager. Those are all ways to kind of bring your sentence to life and discuss appearance in a more accessible way that's kind of more interesting to talk about. Okay. We often discuss clothing as well, especially if it helps point out character traits or other information. We might mention whether clothes look clean or dirty, old or new. Certain types of clothing can tell us about a person's occupation, such as a police uniform, a safety vest on a construction worker, a tulle skirt on a ballerina, a fancy suit on a banker. People often use clothing to help express their individuality. If you look at how these two girls are dressed, right, they've made choices about how they're looking. What does it say about someone if they wear only bright, colorful clothes or if they wear only black? What does it say that she's got this kind of spiky collar on or a giant cross? Um, what does it say if a character's always wearing the latest trends? They're always very hip or wearing clothes that are vintage or retro or clothes that are non-trendy, old-fashioned or out of date, right? Because people choose clothes, right? So it does say something that somebody wore this bright, vibrant dress. To me, this is somebody who must feel very confident. It's fitted, it's low cut. She's comfortable with people looking at her. She obviously feels amazing. And so maybe she's um, very outgoing, very bold. And this person has made some interesting choices. The long hair that kind of covers up her face and her bangs that almost cover her eyes make me wonder if she might be shyer. I know she looks a little bit tough because she's wearing the black and all the kind of metal accessories, but a lot of people I know that have dressed kind of more dark this way have actually been people that are a little bit shy and often don't want attention. But that's just me. So think about what the clothes mean and what the character is trying to express with their clothes. Keep in mind that some types of clothing or their hats or their headgear can also express religious beliefs about their modesty, about body, about what they think about the world. Okay. So because you're starting with the outward appearance, but you're going to move towards their inner personality, this is not inappropriate to mention, right? Like somebody like this who's wearing that kind of cap that the Amish or the Mennonite girls wear, it's expressing something about their religion, which might come up next. Same thing if you're seeing somebody like this who's like ultra Orthodox. All of these things have religion and beliefs and philosophies behind them. Okay, so I grabbed a popular character from when I was a kid because I figured nobody would probably use this. For anybody who's not sure, this is Lucille Ball, who was a very famous female comedian when she was um, younger. Everybody watched her show. Very hilarious. So I'm just going to describe kind of how she looks. Lucille has red curly hair piled on top of her head with a large blue bow. She has deep blue eyes and pale skin with dark wine lips and exaggerated eyelashes and brows. I mean, you can see the individual eyelashes from here. She is wearing an old-fashioned dress with a high collar in light blue and, and a blue and white plaid bodice over top. Oh, that flares out into a skirt. She has on a light blue, could have sworn I'd fix this, apron that has dark zigzag trims on it. Her lips are curled up in a sneer, and she looks either disgusted or repulsed. Overall, she looks like an angry 1950s housewife, which she was kind of popular during that time period. Okay. After we've finished describing their outwards appearance, we're going to turn inwards and look at their inner personality traits. Keep in mind that we can describe people in neutral or positive or negative ways. And sometimes the exact same character trait can be described both negatively or positively, depending on how the person describing feels about that trait or depending on the situation. If you're frustrated with somebody and you're trying to change their mind, you might call them stubborn. However, if you feel like somebody is keeping going under hardship, you might call them determined. It's basically the same character trait, though. It's somebody who's got their mind fixed on something and they're not willing to change. It can be negative or it can be positive. Same thing with words like bossy as a negative or decisive as a positive. Hyper as a negative or energetic as a positive trait. Angry as a negative trait or passionate as a positive trait. Nitpicky, negative. Detail-oriented, positive. Cheap, negative. Thrifty, positive. Apathetic, which is kind of like doesn't care about stuff, negative. Positive, stoic, someone who doesn't get all worked up and emotional about things. So when you're describing them, keep in mind that it's expressing a little bit of your point of view of the person and how much you value that trait as well. Okay. So here are some really common character traits. This is from a career one. So it's kind of slanted a little bit. So I added some other ones. Things like ambitious, creative, compassionate, patient, courageous, flexible, honest, humble, honorable, in other words, like having integrity, loyal, conscientious. It's kind of conscientious is sort of like paying attention to details, being aware of your obligations and your duties. Persistent, resilient. Resilient is like when you bounce back easily from difficulties. Disciplined. Some other common positive character traits that I think of when I'm thinking about how to describe people. Things like brave, truthful, loving, wise, industrious. Industrious is like hardworking, cooperative, trustworthy, reliable, resourceful, helpful, generous, imaginative, independent, active, organized, and thoughtful. We looked at this before. This is where somebody's values and beliefs, which can be like their philosophy, it can be connected to their religion. And so some of these are kind of repeats, but they're often part of people's sort of what they call worldview, like how they approach the world. It's not quite describing their personality necessarily, although in some cases it is. And again, you can see there's a lot of repetition here. Things like generosity, integrity, loyalty, devoted or devotion, loving, kindness, sincerity, self-control, peaceful, faithful, patience, determination, persistence, open-minded, fair, cooperative, tolerant, optimistic, or spiritual. Now, there are lots of traits that are sometimes thought of as negative or undesirable. And if you're picking a character from a TV show, not all characters are positive. Maybe there's a villain that you like and enjoy watching. And so these are some of the different, hang on a second, different negative traits that I thought of. There are other people that might think of different ones. You do not have to only use things that are on my list. You can use anything that works, okay? It just sometimes, hang on a second, sorry. Sometimes people have trouble kind of thinking of words and they can get stuck with like nice, mean, helpful, not helpful. So I'm trying to basically give you some vocabulary to use to kind of describe people. Disorganized, messy, unclean, dishonest, unreliable, untrustworthy. You can see some of these, they've basically just kind of given them the opposite of what the good trait is, like trustworthy versus untrustworthy. Clingy, extravagant, someone who spends like a lot of money. Undisciplined, careless, thoughtless, mean or rude. Sneaky, foolish, reckless, and dangerous. Reckless, I think, is somebody like who doesn't care about stuff. Dangerous is a little step farther, someone who's sort of actively trying to do things that are dangerous or difficult, like climbing Mount Everest or something. Vicious, calculating. Calculating is somebody, not talking about math, it's like the idea of somebody who's always sort of thinking about how they can ahead, how they can kind of pull one over on people, that kind of idea. Greedy, gluttonous, lustful, irreverent. Irreverent is somebody like who doesn't kind of doesn't take things seriously, but also sort of treats things that are special or sacred as if they are not important. Judgmental, lazy, difficult, whiny, boring. Violent, unstable, chaotic. Chaotic is a funny word, but it makes me think of things like Loki, right? He's not just a normal person who's got some violence. There's a deliberate desire to stir up mischief, and there's very like huge unpredictability there. Two-faced, somebody who pretends to be one thing to your face and then something else behind your back. Traitorous. In this case, it could be like, somebody who's betraying somebody in a marriage, but it could also be, say, if you're watching a military show and somebody's selling military secrets to the enemy, that kind of thing. Cheater, liar, cowardly, resentful. Resentful is somebody who's like they're feeling angry about something, but they often don't feel free to speak up about it. So they kind of like they'll glare, they'll pout. They sort of seem sort of angry and irritated all the time, but you don't really know why. Erratic. Erratic is if somebody's not how to put it? Uh unpredictable, I guess, in a sense. Superstitious, gullible. Gullible is somebody who believes kind of believes anything you tell them. Gossipy, argumentative, passive, or aggressive. Okay, so here are some other negative traits. And again, this is stuff that has a negative connotation. Some of these are the same ones that I was thinking of. Some of these are a little bit different. Let me see. Disrespectful is different. Impatient, abrasive. Abrasive is somebody like the kind of person that's always hard to get along with because they just kind of say something not necessarily rude, but they're very short. I don't mean height, I mean like they put things in the most difficult way possible. Pessimistic, somebody who's always kind of looking on the dark side. Cruel, unmerciful. Narcissistic. Narcissistic is when somebody kind of only thinks about themselves and other people aren't really important or real to them. Obnoxious, malicious, pettiness, quarrelsome. Caustic. Caustic I think of as like sarcastic or kind of verbally very kind of mean and cruel. Selfish, unforgiving. So remember that when we're doing this, we're looking for not just the label, but we're looking for proof that they are displaying that trait, whether it's positive or negative. So somebody might show that they're greedy by caring more about money than about other people. Or someone might show that they're cruel by saying or doing things to hurt other people on purpose. A character might show that they're quarrelsome by picking fights with others, even over very minor things. And another character might show themselves to be dishonest by continually lying and holding back information from those around her. So when you're writing this part of your character trait, your character sketch, you always want to link the character trait to an example of either words or actions where the character is displaying that trait. We don't want to have to just take your word for it. We want you to be able to demonstrate it, basically. So a typical sentence might look like, character shows that he is whatever trait, plus a subordinate clause giving an example. So examples might be, the Hulk shows that he has a tender heart through his gentleness towards the Black Widow, whom he cares for deeply. Ken shows that he feels resentful when he decides to get back at Barbie by taking over the Barbie world and changing it from a female-run world to a male-run world. Oppenheimer shows that he is patriotic through his attempts to follow the Army's orders regarding his love life, even though he feels he is betraying his lover. So in each of these cases, I named a trait and then gave an example of where in the show they demonstrate that trait. It also can come up with words. Um, you have to be careful with words because sometimes people will say things they don't mean. Like a character who's unloyal might be walking around telling people, hey, I'm behind you, hey, I love you, that kind of thing. So not everybody's words are a good display of their character traits, but sometimes when a character is speaking, what they say really reveals how they think about themselves or other people or the world. So, for example, in the movie A Few Good Men, there's the character Jessup, who's very angry, and at one point he gets mad at the lawyer and says, "You can't handle the truth," very angrily. And he's displaying there his arrogance. He's kind of assuming that he's better than others and that he can handle emotionally what other men cannot due to their supposed weakness. Um, Another example would be in Lord of the Rings, Frodo and Sam near the end they're getting overwhelmed and Frodo's kind of wanting to give up and he says, "What are we holding on to, Sam?" And Sam says that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. So in this scene from The Two Towers, Frodo is beginning to lose hope as he's tired of fighting the ring and continuing this journey to try and destroy it. However, his friend Sam is both determined and brave. He is not willing to give up this journey, even though he knows it's hurting them both badly and might end in their deaths. Sam shows his innate goodness when he places preserving the good in the world above an easy journey and even above their own lives. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we're looking for when you're talking about your character. I know not all characters are heroic, but a character could be showing that they're mean or that they're cruel or thoughtless or whatever. Also, you need to look at whether you're describing like a main character or are they a secondary character or a minor character. There's no, you don't have to pick a main character. Maybe one of your favorite people in a show is somebody who's secondary or somebody who only shows up every now and again. So a main character is going to show up in every chapter or scene or every episode. The narrative may even be told from their viewpoint. You know how some shows have like a voiceover, like Grey's Anatomy has that, where the main character Meredith is always kind of talking about things and introducing the show and making commentary and wrapping it up, right? They may have a high or the highest amount of dialogue or actions in each chapter or each episode. They might be the main person making choices, actions, or influencing events. They may be changing the most internally, such as going from cowardly to brave, or weak to strong, or confused to sure. A secondary character is not necessarily mentioned in every chapter or scene. They might be. They might show up in episodes, but not necessarily have all the speech or all the action. We often can see them mainly through the main character's eyes, and we know very little or just a little bit of their back history, their family, their friends. They may have some influence on the plot through some words or actions, but they're not a main or a pivotal character. So if you think of somebody like on Friends and the coffee shop in the show, the character Gunther, right? He's a secondary character. We do see him fairly often, but we don't really know a whole lot about him other than his infatuation. We don't hear a lot about his history. He doesn't get a whole lot of dialogue. He's kind of a secondary character. A minor character is mentioned only briefly, right? They may not even know their name. They may have very little importance to the story. For the purposes of this assignment, I wouldn't really expect you to pick somebody who's a minor character because you just won't know enough about them to be able to discuss them, really. Okay, let's see what's next here. Okay, so how does this character influence events? One thing about this is it depends a little bit on whether you're discussing a movie character or a TV character, right? Because movies often have great big story arcs where a character is going to have a major role in influencing what happens in the story, how the movie ends, all that kind of thing. Whereas if you're looking at a TV show, often the events are not quite as big. Not always, sometimes there is. Um, so their actions may be smaller, or more controlled. It kind of depends. Um, Sometimes the shows may have to do with like military campaigns or thwarting terrorism or that kind of thing. Um, Characters can influence things directly in a variety of ways. Through their words, encouraging others to take a certain action or choice. Through their actions that cause certain things to happen. Or by refusing to take action, which may also cause things to happen. That kind of sounds confusing, but I'm thinking of things like sometimes like a cop will decide, oh, I'm not going to arrest this guy. I'm going to give them a second chance. And it turns out that that guy's actually the villain and they run off and murder somebody else. So their lack of action ended up causing events as well. So in any kind of TV show, even like a show like Friends, say, some of the characters may be more influential than others. So think about what does your character do in the show? What's their role? Characters can also influence things indirectly, right? They may have relationships with other people, their words and their choices and their actions may affect the events in the book or your show. Some examples might include somebody trying to get their attention, right? A rock star may have an obsessed fan who seeks to get their attention through crimes by making a mistake. As we talked about, a policeman might have questioned a suspect and let them go, who later goes on to commit a murder. By reminding them of certain values, seeing somebody show gentleness to someone may remind a character they need to show gentleness. By reminding them of some of themselves or of someone important. For example, someone tempted to commit murder, but stops when a child enters a room, that kind of thing. And you can see this, I think it's more obvious during movies, but a lot of times if you're watching episodes, like some shows, each episode is its own tiny little story, and you could watch them out of order and it wouldn't really make any kind of difference. But other shows have kind of an overriding character arc, like maybe the main character is in the process of breaking up with their wife and they're having depression and they're giving into like a gambling thing. And you can gradually see them beginning to break down over the course of a show. So it depends a little bit on what kind of show or what kind of character you're watching, but there can be this indirect influence that happens over a longer uh, time than just an episode, like over a season or something. If you're choosing a character from a TV show, they may play kind of a certain repeated role in the show. And by role, I don't mean like, okay, they play like Chandler. No, I mean like a lot of times in, especially in sitcoms or dramas, there's these kind of stereotypes, right? Where somebody's playing a typical role and we kind of just are used to the fact that that's the kind of role they play. So, um, for Chandler, for example, he's kind of playing a comic role. He's kind of the character that always cracks jokes or make the others laugh. That's a pretty common character in sitcoms, for example. Some other possible recurring roles, somebody who's a loudmouth. They're always, kind of talking off and saying really rude things. Someone who's actively a bully. Someone who's kind of the outcast. They're kind of the person everybody jokes about in the show. Someone who's a truth teller, right? They don't necessarily have a lot of social skills. They just come right out and say things, kind of throws things into chaos. Someone who's a parental figure. That's true even if there's not a family, right? Sometimes you might see that in a cop show where there's a lead detective who's acting kind of as a parental figure, or in a mafia show where the one guy's acting kind of fatherly to somebody. Somebody who's the hero, the villain, obviously. Someone who's the sidekick. That's the person who's not, right, the hero. They're not doing all the main actions, the main decisions, but they're supporting the hero. The similar one for a villain would be what they call henchmen, but it's the same idea, right? It's not the person who's making all the decisions, but it's the person who's supporting them. Someone who's the enforcer. This isn't somebody like the bully. This is someone who's like the tough guy, the one who's kind of making people follow the rules or do what's right or that kind of thing. And that can happen either as someone who's like an enforcer in a criminal organization, or it can be somebody who's an enforcer on like the police, or it doesn't necessarily have to be good or bad. Someone who's really talkative. I find that's a really common character where this one person will come on and they just kind of like talk, 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 talk. And it sort of becomes sort of their role is to come in and disrupt things with their conversation. Someone who's very confused or foolish, thinking of Friends, the character Matt LeBlanc played, right? He was always doing goofy, silly things. That was kind of his job per se in that show. Someone who's a fighter. Again, that kind of depends on the show, but like if you see some types of murder mysteries or cop shows or dramas, there may be one character who's the one that's going to be the first to swing a punch or pull out their martial arts or pull out their gun or whatever. So I picked a character that I'm familiar with. This is a character called Dwayne Cassius Pride. He's on a show called NCIS New Orleans. Okay. So here is my character sketch where I'm trying to go from his outward appearance, his inner personality, and kind of his role on the show. So Dwayne Cassius Pride, who is the lead detective on NCIS New Orleans, is one of my favorite characters to watch on TV. He's an older man with short gray hair and a thin, bony face, with suntan skin and a thin, fit body. He often seems to be dressed in long pants and a comfortable t-shirt or a casual dress shirt. Dwayne is the leader of the NCIS team in New Orleans. He shows kindness to his staff by cooking food for them and talking to them about their problems. He is decisive and quick to make decisions about what to do in the middle of criminal investigations. He struggles some with his temper and sometimes gets himself in trouble because he is too hot-headed. He says things he shouldn't and sometimes breaks the law in order to catch a criminal. He is very determined and pursues the mayor's criminal activities and proof of them with a single-minded, almost obsessive focus. Dwayne constantly shows an intense love of his city with all its history and its celebrations. The fight between good and evil that threatens to overtake the city is often played out in Dwayne's own heart. He struggles with his criminal past just as New Orleans does itself. The friendship and loyalty of his team often grounds him and brings him back to his senses. The times when he is most at risk of his darker side taking over is when he runs off on his own without his team to do something he knows is wrong, but feels is necessary. He portrays a flawed hero who will never give up fighting against corruption and darkness, even in himself. Okay. So this is probably a lot longer than 7. I would probably need to shorten it a little bit. But that's my example of a character sketch. Okay. Moving on to part B. Part B is a summary of the show or movie that your character is in. For this one, you're to write a brief summary of the show or the movie in approximately a half of a page of writing. In your summary, make sure you include what is the show or the movie about? Who are the other characters? Like you've already talked about the one, but who are the other characters? What is the genre of the show or movie? And why do you enjoy this show or movie? Remember, you're not going to do this in a question and answer format. Like you're not going to like, what is the show or movie about? And then give me an answer. You're going to write this in a paragraph format. So this should also, like I said, be from the same show that you chose for part A. Okay, quick review of our structure for a summary paragraph. Remember that the opening sentence should introduce the main topic of the summary. So in other words, tell me your show, right? That's your top bun. Your body sentence is all those details about the characters and the show and what you like. And then your closing sentence is going to restate your topic and maybe the main point or points of your summary paragraph. Okay. So I wasn't sure how familiar people were with genre. So I kind of wanted to do a little bit of a dive on it. What is genre? If I say like, tell me the genre, what do I mean? Well, Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines a genre as a category of artistic, musical, or literary composition characterized by a particular style, form, or content. Each genre has its own characteristics that define it. Not all of the genres listed below will work for this question. I actually ended up putting some of the ones I don't want you to use over here. So some common media genres are things like mysteries, police procedurals, horror, action, adventure, comedies, sometimes called a sitcom, romance, drama, fantasy, science fiction, soap opera, historical fiction. For the purposes of this particular assignment, I'm going to exclude any nonfiction shows, okay? Or shows that don't have a narrative structure. So that would include variety shows like Saturday Night Live, talk shows like Oprah, the news, documentaries, televised competitions, things like American Idol or So You Think You Can Dance, that won't really work for here. Reality TV, Survivor, Say Yes to the Dress, or any kind of stand-up comedy routines. These just really don't work for what we're trying to do. We're sticking to these kind of fictional genres, okay? Okay, so mysteries. Most mystery shows will start by showing the crime, often a murder, in the first few minutes of the show. Later on, somebody finds the body, or another crime if it is, and the detective, who may not be an actual police detective, begins to investigate the crime. Typically, they are looking for means, a way to kill a person, motive, a reason to kill them, and opportunity, a time when they could actually have committed the crime. Mysteries generally end after the murderer is discovered. Some examples might include The Orient Express, Murder, She Wrote, Miss Marple mysteries. Police procedurals. These are very similar to mystery shows and maybe kind of like a subgenre in a sense. These shows will also usually open with a crime being committed, not necessarily murder. In these shows, the detective must be in law enforcement. Maybe they're a police officer, FBI, NCS, or some other format. In these shows, it might not be a murder, but some other crime like rape, kidnapping, arson, theft, terrorism. The show will usually kind of balance out what the law allows law enforcement to legally do with what the detectives actually want to do and sometimes do. Some shows will also include lawyers counseling the police on appropriate procedures. These shows also end when the crime is solved. Law and Order, FBI Most Wanted, those kind of things. Okay, horror. These shows may be psychologically or physically horrific. There's usually some sort of evil force of some kind, which may be a person or maybe some sort of supernatural source, such as ghosts, monsters. The majority of the show will be this entity or person terrifying and often killing others. These shows may be very graphic and include lots of blood and gore. The emphasis is kind of less on solving a riddle, like in a murder mystery, and more on the experience of fear. The entity or villain or whatever may or may not be caught by the end of the show. So some examples would be things like the Blair Witch Project, Saw, Amityville Horror, those kind of things. Action. Action movies are going to feature a lot of fight scenes, chase scenes, explosions, shootouts, basically lots and lots of actions happening. There may not be a whole lot of plot and a whole lot of characterization, but lots of exciting stuff to watch. Things like Mission Impossible, Die Hard, that kind of stuff. Comedy. On TV, these shows are often called situational comedies or sitcoms. These generally have a set cast who appear every week, often in the same place, at their home, at the bar, at work, and they will respond in humorous ways to various situations that are often exaggerated, kind of all out of proportion. Friends, Big Bang Theory, that kind of thing. Romance. While there are movies that are simply romances, it's kind of rare to find a TV show that is only a romance. In a typical romance, the couple to be meets in some cute and interesting way, and they gradually fall in love together after a series of various obstacles. These are generally intended to be light, feel-good type movies, right? Some examples like Pretty Women, When Harry Met Sally, that kind of stuff. Drama. Drama is generally any kind of show that involves tension and suspense, but does not fall in the murder mystery format, right? It's not a comedy, but it's not specifically a murder mystery. In a TV format, this will often be a fixed cast of characters that appear week to week and go through exciting and often emotional experiences. In movies, it could be way more open-ended. A lot of movies are going to come under the drama category. Things like Titanic, Brokeback Mountain, Boston Legal, Grey's Anatomy, all those kind of things, right? Soap operas. Soap operas are a very specific form of a drama. They're usually shown in daytime TV. There's generally an exaggerated focus on emotions and really small details of conversations in people's lives. It's going to focus a lot on romance and tension. It may take several shows to solve very small problems. Soap operas generally move at a really slow pace. Some examples of soap operas would be General Hospital, As the World Turns, Days of Our Lives. Fantasy. A fantasy is a drama that's going to have some sort of imaginary or magical element or creatures or maybe alternative universes as part of its world. It can be set in modern times or the past, occasionally set in the future. Characters may have magical powers or be fighting creatures or people with magical powers. There may be a very strong good versus evil story arc. It might include superheroes or comic book characters. So examples might include like Avengers, Lord of the Rings, The Witcher, that kind of stuff. Science fiction. This is a type of drama that's usually set in the future. It often explores a specific invention or discovery or an event that's based on science, maybe things like robots, space exploration, climate change. In science fiction, anything that's out of the ordinary is going to have a scientific explanation. There's no magic. It will often include dystopian feature stories. So things like Lost in Space, Star Trek, Hunger Games, Divergent. Those would all be examples of types of science fiction. Historical fiction. These shows are usually dramas. They're not usually comedies. They're set in some sort of historical time period, and they generally explore the events, the lifestyles, and the people of those times. They're usually realistic to some degree, although they may not stick 100% to the facts or to the historical record. It may be loosely based on a large historical event like World War I or the Great Depression. Some examples would be things like Downtown Abbey, Outlander, Spartacus, that kind of thing. Okay. Discussing why you like a show. Sometimes people find this part really hard, right? Um, well, I just like the show. I don't know why. So I'm going to try and break down some of the parts of a show that you may be liking. Maybe you like the characters. Maybe they appeal to you, or you find them funny, or realistic, or they remind you of yourself or somebody you know. The storylines. Maybe you find the storylines really exciting, or really funny, or really sad, or whatever, that whatever kind of storyline you like. The dialogue, right? Some shows are really, really known for their amazing dialogue. Maybe that's why you're watching a certain show. Um, Visual cinematography. That's kind of basically how the show looks, right? Some shows, the looks of the show isn't very important. Other shows, you can see they've really spent some time trying to make the colors balance, beautiful landscapes, all that kind of stuff. How it makes you feel. Lots of times we watch shows for how it makes us feel. We like feeling scared, or we like feeling sad, or we like romance. That may be part of the appeal of the show. Sometimes the message or the theme, right? One thing I like about criminal procedure shows is that the good guys always get the bad guys, right? I just kind of like that particular theme. It might be connection you feel to the characters, the setting, or the storyline. Depending on what kind of show you're watching, maybe you're just like, oh, that kind of tells my story. When I watch this, I feel heard, I feel seen. Or it could be any combination of the above. All right, so I don't know what keeps dinging at me. Sorry, guys, and I apologize for the noise. I don't know what it is. I enjoy watching NCIS New Orleans for a lot of different reasons. Okay, so here I'm explaining what I like about the show. This is kind of like a little picture of the show. They're in a bar. They end up in a bar a lot. I think he ends up owning a bar, but also there's a lot of music in the show, which often happens in bars too. I enjoy watching NCIS New Orleans for a lot of different reasons. First of all, the setting and history of the city of New Orleans is fascinating to me and is incorporated into almost all the storylines. Secondly, I should have finished it secondly because I started with firstly. Secondly, the main character is not only a detective, but also a musician. So music bands and concerts are featured heavily throughout the series as well, which I think makes it more interesting. The writers also did a good job creating characters who are three-dimensional and seem realistic. I also like the overriding story arc of the mayor, who may or may not be corrupt, and the lead detective's determination to try and uncover his deceit and criminal activities. So I gave you several different reasons what I like about the show, right? So that's what we're kind of looking for. So then I sort of put it all together, okay? Here is my rough draft, and I'm showing this to you because it comes off a little clunky to me. So I'm trying to show you the process that you got to go through when you're revising. So here is how my initial draft is. NCIS New Orleans is one of the spin-off shows from the original NCIS, which showcases the detective work of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. This show is also a police procedural, one that is set in New Orleans, which makes a rich backdrop for the many crimes that occur, which often includes its crucial place on the coast and many historical events and stories. Other characters in the original few seasons of the show are Brody, a newcomer to New Orleans from Michigan, Christopher LaSalle, who comes from Alabama and is an experienced member of the team, Loretta Wade is the wise coroner dispensing wisdom and clues, Sebastian is her comical and bumbling assistant, and Patton Plame, the hip computer expert who helps them with all things techie. Episodes generally start with a dead sailor, and the team disperses in all directions, trying to track down clues to the murder. Along the way, there will be lots of historical tidbits, plenty of jazz music, and the typical banter between cops. But the excellent acting carries this show above its formula and brings the characters to life. And then I just ended up kind of tacking on that last part about all the reasons I enjoy the show. And it kind of feels tacked on. So when I looked at it, I was trying to think like, how can I fix this and make it sound better, right? It's really important to be able to critique your own work. Sometimes it can be very difficult for people. Putting it away and then coming back to it with fresh eyes can help make the faults stand out. Reading it out loud can help make them stand out. Sometimes having a friend read it and tell you what seems great and what seems not so great. We all have faults in our work, and it isn't anything that anyone needs to be embarrassed by. That's why the revision and editing steps in writing exist, and they are practiced even by professional writers. There's no one who just writes everything perfectly the moment they sit down. Not even very famous writers like Stephen King or Nora Roberts, right? So, for example, I know I tend to write long and then I need to edit my work down to more appropriate proportions. I'm always kind of aware of that. It does need to be at least half a page, this assignment. So I do need to have some length to it. They also wanted us to cover a fair bit of information, which generally takes some length as well. Remember that that length is not a limit. Like you can go over half a page if you want to, but you wouldn't want to like go crazy and write me 2 pages. That would be too much, right? Remember when you're revising, we've talked about the acronym ARMS: add things, remove things, move things, or substitute things. For myself, looking at my rough draft, I'd probably try to condense some of the sentences and look for places where I'm repeating myself or saying something very similar. I felt like I was very repetitive for some reason. I would probably cut back a little bit on my reasons why I like the show and maybe spend a bit of time describing the other characters. So then I go through and I started crossing off things that I thought were repetitive or that weren't needed. Okay. And then as I was looking at it, I thought, you know what? I really need to distribute that chunk at the bottom kind of all through the paragraph because it just makes more sense. So then I ended up with this. Okay. And now this sounds a lot smoother. It still has some things I probably want to change, but it sounds a lot better than it did. I enjoy watching NCIS New Orleans for a lot of different reasons. NCIS New Orleans, which showcases the detective work of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, is a stellar example of one of my favorite genres, police procedurals. First of all, the setting and history of the city of New Orleans is fascinating to me and is incorporated into almost all the storylines. Second, the main character is not only a detective, but also a musician. So unique music bands and concerts are featured heavily throughout the series as well, which I think makes it more interesting. The writers also did a good job creating characters who are three-dimensional and seem realistic. Other characters in the original few seasons of the show are Brody, a newcomer to New Orleans from Michigan, Christopher LaSalle, who comes from Alabama and is an experienced member of the team, Loretta Wade as the wise coroner dispensing wisdom and clues, Sebastian as her comical and bumbling assistant, and Patton Plane, the hip computer expert who helps them with all things techie. The characters do not stay static and frozen in time, but grow and develop in various ways that show a level of realism not typical to this genre. Episodes generally start with a dead sailor, and the team disperses in all directions, trying to track down clues to the murder. Along the way, there will be lots of intriguing history, incredible scenery, plenty of jazz music, and great dialogue, which makes this show such a fun one to watch. So I have kind of my opening sentence, which kind of have almost two opening sentences. I probably need to fix this. I'm not going to do that right now, but that would be an example. And then down here, I've got my closing sentence, which I kind of like this closing sentence. I think I did a good job with that. And then I've got my middle. I counted this out. I estimate it's around 230 to 240 words, which should be close to half a page. I basically tried to take out a lot of the redundancy and the repetition. If I were to work this through one more time, the one sentence I really don't like is this super long sentence. I think it's way too long. Um, I probably would take that out and give each character their own sentence. Um, because I think that would be easier to read. Right now, I think that's too long a sentence. So I'm just trying to role model when you're looking at your work, you're looking for what could be made better. Okay. And everybody has something that they can do better in any writing. Like I've done this a couple times. I could easily revise this a few more times till I get it to exactly where I want it. All right. Remember when you're doing this part B to include what is the show or movie about? Who are the other characters? What is the genre? And we discussed all the genres. And why do you enjoy this show or movie? Um, this is Tuesday. We will be back tomorrow talking about the next assignment in Unit 2. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, reach out to me.